Nai Mot Amatyakul printed the Three Seals Law for the first time in 1849-50, King Rama III ordered the books seized and destroyed. Scholarly accounts of this incident vary on the details and lack any citation of the sources. Several accounts state that only one volume survives in the National Library. The recent unearthing of a second copy in Paris is an occasion to review the contemporary sources on this incident. To begin with, let's remind ourselves about the Three Seals Law. This is a big collection of legal texts that King Rama I ordered up in 1805 in order to be used in the judicial system at the time, and they remained the law of the land until the end of the 19th century. In 1849, Nai Mot attempted to have them printed, and King Rama III ordered them to be seized. Only a few years later, the missionary Dan Beach Bradley did print the laws, and it was a very successful publication, reprinted 10 times by the 1890s, and often much of it copied into the government gazette. Other editions appeared around 1900, particularly one by Prince Ratburi, the son of King Chulalongkorn, who was assigned to look after law in the reforms of the Fifth Reign. And then in 1937, there was what became the standard printed edition, done by Thammasat University, and then later reprinted by Kuru Supa and by the Fine Arts Department. And finally, in 2007, the Royal Society, the Rajapandit Satan, published a completely new edition, which is special because in it includes photographic reproductions of every page in the 1805 manuscripts. So this clears up any doubts about what might have changed from the manuscripts during this conversion into print. Okay. Now, I guess we first knew about this and got interested in this from the remarkable article written by Yonio Ishii almost 40 years ago, where he summarizes the Three Seals Law in 50 pages. And he said, towards the end of the reign of Rama III, Nai Mot Amatyakul attempted the first printing with the help of Dr. Dan Beach Bradley. However, this invited the king's anger, and he ordered the confiscation of the printed laws to be destroyed by fire. So today, there's only one surviving copy of Volume 1 in the National Library, and everything else was destroyed. There are several other reports on this incident, for instance, by Jean Burnet, who was involved in the production of the Thammasat University edition in the 1930s. He says much the same thing. The king ordered it seized, it was all burnt, and there's just one volume of it left. Robert Lingard says very much the same thing. Prince Damrong commented on this, first in San Somdet, in his correspondence with Prince Narit, but also in his correspondence with Pia Anuman. And he says King Rama III got angry at this and ordered it to be seized and taken away. Now, what is striking, there's some other accounts too. There's Chai Rung Sin, there's Walter Vella, and there's some others. What is striking about all of them is that not one of them has a footnote. Not one of them has an indication of what is the source of the information about this seizure and about what happened after the seizure. And so even though all of these accounts I'm talking about were written considerably later, mostly over 100 years later, they cite no sources at all. And perhaps partly as a result of this, there has been a lot of debate and discussion and disagreement on why the king had them seized. Ishii said it was because the laws were considered sacred and therefore ordinary people were not supposed to see them. This is actually wrong. We know now that the laws were very widely copied and distributed for the use of litigants and for the use of those officials who were involved in judging cases. There's lots of copies being found, particularly in provincial archives. Lingard said it was because Mott had not sought royal permission. Prince Damrong said because the king feared the laws would be misused by the kind of people who often try to misuse the legal system. Samuel Smith said it was because the king was wary of innovations from the West, and Ajahn Tenet and all summarized that the king took this opportunity to punish the missionaries for other offenses, for other things that they had done, which he did not like. Okay? Now, in 1883, there was a book published in Paris by the Marquis de Croisier, which is a catalogue of books and manuscripts, Thai books and manuscripts, found in the National Library in Paris. And in that book, number 30 of the manuscripts is something which is titled Recueil des lois siamoises. And it says that in 1849, a young Siamese mandarin had the enterprise to have printed the Siamese laws in 2 volumes. And it goes on to give a table of contents. Now, when I saw this, I immediately thought, surely this must be Mot's edition. It's 1849, a young mandarin, and so on. But then the second thought was, but surely if that was the case, the French scholars of Thailand, Burnet or Langat, or the people who came after them, surely would have found this. So there must be something wrong. There must be some mistake. Earlier this year, in 2025, I mentioned this concern to Gregory Korisky, who is the EFEO representative in Bangkok at the moment. And he said, well, I have a friend who works in the National Library in Paris. As a result of that, in early March of 2025, this turns up in my inbox. And this is a scan of Mot's edition of the Three Seals Law, printed in 1849-50. The title page says A Book of Laws in CS in Jula Sakarat 1211, printed 21 law texts, but in this volume there are only 16. There's a list of contents, and all these 16 items are checked as correct according to the royal version. What then can we find out about this? It appears that it's not true that they were all destroyed. What else is right or wrong in this story? What we need to do is to look for contemporary sources from the time. And the first place to go is to the man himself, Nai Mot. And he is a very, very remarkable fellow. He's remarkable first because of his family. It's a family of Chinese origin. And most of these families will start their family histories by telling the story of the original ancestor who traveled from China to Siam. But the Amatyakul family is totally different. In their several family histories, there is no sign of such an ancestor. He's not mentioned and there's nothing known about him. Instead, these histories are all about how the members of this family became very successful at becoming Kunnang Thai, becoming Thai nobility. Nai Mot's father, Paya Maha Amat, was a quite sort of middle-level official who got very lucky during the war against Jiao Anu of Vientiane in the 1820s. He rose to be a general, and he returned from the war with great favor from the king, with lots of war slaves and quite a lot of riches as well, probably. His mother was daughter of a Jesua, in other words, a leading Thai Chinese merchant who also had a post in the royal warehouse. And his wife was a daughter of the Choduk, one of the 2 official leaders of the Chinese community in Siam. And she came from the Grairek family, another of these Chinese origin families which became very successful in the Thai nobility. He grew up just outside the Bangkok palace, mingling with royalty and nobility from his early years. And when he was ordained as a novice, it was in Wat Phra in the Temple of the Emerald Buddha inside the Bangkok palace. though he actually resided at another wat across the river in Kongsan. He's remarkable, secondly, because from his teenage years, he mixed together with the Westerners who had started turning up in Bangkok in the second quarter of the 19th century. And he became on close terms with Palagua, with Bradley, with Caswell, with Chandley, with Lanoldi. And what he did was he learnt from them several scientific, technical, and engineering skills. He had a great talent for this kind of thing. At some point, he made his own lathe, which is quite remarkable. He was knowledgeable about electricity, and he had an electroplating works. He was knowledgeable on chemistry and on medicines, and he invented a patent medicine which became very famous. And he went from this chemistry into photography and also into printing. So he's very much not quite unique, but one of the very small group of young Thai at this time who just soaked up this new knowledge that was coming from the West. Now, the family has compiled several histories. The first one that I have found goes back to 1964 and edited by Nai Mot Amatyakul, a famous figure in the fine arts department of that time. And there's another one which comes out in 1977, which was reprinted in 1986 in this one with the pink cover. And in this one, there is a memoir written by Nai Mot himself. And it's a rather unusual document in that almost all of it is family gossip. He writes about his various relatives, what they did, and about their houses and other things that they did. And almost throughout, he uses the family nicknames, so it's very difficult to identify actually who these people are. And he has almost nothing in it, about himself and his very remarkable early life. The only difference comes in the very last page, page 28, which includes an account of the incident in 1849-50 of his attempt to print the laws. And we will go into his account in some detail. He says his interest in the laws began because of an inheritance by a man he calls Uncle Praglin, who was actually his adoptive grandfather, who was a very rich man, who had been a personal attendant to King Mongkut before he rose to the throne, and who was said to have 250 servants in his household. There must have been a dispute over this very large inheritance, though we don't know the details. So he sent people to the scribes' hall, to the Rong Alak, to copy out the laws. And after he had done that, he said, after reading them, I thought that people with court cases who did not know the law were in great difficulty. So there was a social reason to have them printed. Besides, there was the matter of the capital that he already had invested in acquiring the laws, and it would be good to print and sell them to recover the capital. So he commissioned a missionary doctor to print 200 copies for a cost of 500 baht, and just one volume was finished and the second one was waiting when things started to go wrong. He says that when Sir James Book came, and this means Raja Book from Sarawak, and he was deputed by London, by the British government, to come to Siam in 1850 in order to renegotiate the trade treaty done earlier with Burnie. And essentially his brief was to negotiate the treaty, which Bowring did successfully negotiate a few years later. But King Rama III's court was having nothing to do with this, and they simply stonewalled. But this led to some difficulties. There were rumors that the missionaries and the Thai who were close to, were helping Brooke, were helping the foreigner, as it were. So And some of the friends of Prince Mongkut then in the Mongkut got worried about this, and so they went to see the king. And as a result of this, in the end, Mot was summoned to bring his books to the palace, and the king and he had them bring the laws that I had made, and said that when the Jedi was made at Watsagate, to have them buried there, not to have them burnt, but to have them buried in a Jedi. Now, the Jedi at Watsagate means this. It means what we now know as Pukautor, the Golden Mount, which was being built at the top corner of Ratanakosin Island. And this was a prestige project initiated by King Rama III, which went really rather wrong indeed. Because of the marshy nature of the land around that area, when the thing got to a certain size, it started to sink and to collapse. Okay? And we see here, this is a picture taken actually by King Kunmot himself in the 1860s, and you can see here that the project has been abandoned and it's being overgrown. And later, the design was completely changed away from this sort of ziggurat design we can see in the top left-hand corner towards this more circular design, which is of course what it was the eventual result. So it's a very strange idea to have them buried in this under construction, which was a problematic project to say the least. Nai Mot goes on that a few months later, Rama III died, and King Mongkut succeeded him. And he said, well, Nai Mot's printing of the laws was of benefit to the kingdom. They should not be buried in a jedi, but rather should be printed again to be of benefit. I, that's Nai Mot, thus received them back, presented some to the king and the second king, the front palace, and sold all the remainder at 10 baht each. So this is a very different story. It's not about burning. It's not about only having one left. It's actually about getting them all back and selling the entire stock. Now, we have to say, you might say, okay, case closed. But there are some reasons not to take Nai Mot completely at face value. Partly because this is a rather strange memoir. Partly because we don't really know how it came down to the present day. The modern printing simply says that it was passed down in the family and printed at this time. And it's strange, this whole story of having it buried at Pukautor is really a very strange story. So perhaps we need to look back to try and find other contemporary sources which can give us a better idea of what actually had happened. And these sources are the Europeans, who are missionaries and diplomats. And the major source for this is Dan Beach Bradley's journal. He kept a journal, a kind of occasional diary, which has been printed. And he said in the 3rd of September 1850, and this is just when Raja Brooke has come to Siam, quite panic has arisen. As Mot said we saw earlier, it created some sort of a panic. And the panic was that the rumor spread that those Siamese who were helping the missionaries were going to get into trouble, and they were going to be punished somehow for having taught the missionaries Thai, having taught them Pali, and having taught them about Thai culture. And in fact, one or two of them were arrested and put in jail for some time. Bradley also wrote, I learned that Kunmot was in danger for having ventured to print the Siamese laws, which work is now on the press at the Baptist mission. Right, another change in the story. Everyone else says that Bradley printed the books, but that's not true, because actually, at the time of the printing, Bradley was away on leave in the USA. And actually, it was printed at the Baptist mission, a completely different outfit. And then Bradley got scared by all of this. So what he did was go to see Grumluang Wangsa. Grumluang Wangsa is a half-brother of King Mongkut, who was part of this group who were interested in Western knowledge, which became the group known as Yang Siam. And when he went to see Grumluang Wangsa, Wangsa assured us that the king was not displeased with our books, meaning those printed by the mission, but only that he was displeased with the persons who had undertaken to publish the laws of this country and sell them. We'll come back to that in this line is very important. But Guamluang Wangsa went on and said, well, actually, because the printing has stopped and there's no selling, well, he thought there was no selling, we don't think there's an issue. And he was kind of right, because soon after this, everything calmed down. It calmed down partly because the king was sick, and also because Rajaput went away without negotiating a treaty, and if you like, the tension relaxed. Now, we now know that the Baptist mission is part of this story. And the Baptist mission had a journal, an international journal called Missionary Magazine, which printed messages and reports that came from their missions all around the world. And in 29 July 1850, just before all this blows up, it reports that a Siamese nobleman had printed at the press an edition of the Siamese laws. And then in October, right in the middle of the crisis, it reports that the laws had actually been printed and credits this to Kun Mot, a young Siamese nobleman of much promise and talent. In the accounts from the printing office, it says that they had printed 125 copies, which is not the same as Mot's story of 200 copies, and that the total number of pages was 32,000. And that must also be wrong, because Nai Mot's edition is 330 pages long, so that would be less than is needed for 100 copies of the edition. So there's obviously some dispute about the figures, more discrepancy, more mysteries. Now, the Baptist mission, this is a sketch of their their home, their buildings, just a few years earlier. But then another incident which makes the plot thicken considerably. On 4th of January, just a couple of months later, at night, the Baptist mission was fired by an incendiary. It was burnt by arson. And as a result, the printing office, with 2 printing presses, all the fonts, the type foundry, the book boundary, and all the paper went up in flames. Literally, nothing was left at all. Now, this is intriguing in at least 2 ways. One is, was this somehow connected to the printing of the laws? And second, did this result in the burning of the laws? Unfortunately, we don't know the answer to the first question, because we can't find any other information about this burning. Bradley reported that the arsonist was a Thai official who had some personal disputes with people in the mission. In the book of Mot's first volume in Paris, which was scanned for us, inside that book is slipped in a 2-page letter in French. And luckily, and bless them, the people in the reproduction department in Paris, they also scanned this as well, because it's a very important letter. And what it says is that in 1849, a young Siamese mandarin had the enterprise to print the Siamese laws in 2 volumes. In fact, what this is what we have seen earlier in the Croisier volume. What it shows us is that this letter was used to compile the catalogue entry for this book in the National Library. It actually is still there as part of the catalogue entry in the National Library. So, and also at the top of that letter, and also at the top of the first page of the volume, there is some other interesting information. The first one in the letter, it says, these notes, this letter, if you like, was done by the Abbé Clemenceau, who is part of the mission, and that information is given to us by C. de Montigny. And the one on the second one, which is on the title page of the book, says presented to the Imperial Library, which becomes the National Library, by Abbé Clemenceau, and again is signed by de Montigny. So who are these people? Clemenceau was a French missionary. He was there from 1833. He was ranked second to Palagoa when Palagoa wrote his famous description of Siam in 1853. He succeeded Palagoa as leader of the mission and then died in 1864. So in the biographical notes on him in the French historical archives, it says that in 1855, which should be 1856, at the time of a visit to Siam by the French ambassador de Montigny, Clemenceau gave Montigny a copy of the Siamese laws, which Montigny had sent to Paris to the foreign ministry, where it was greatly appreciated. So this gives us the story very nicely. We know now how the book got there, and it got there very soon after the incident which this talk is all about. De Montigny is a prominent French diplomat who spent most of his career in China, but on his way to China in 1856, he was deputed to come to Bangkok to negotiate the French variant of the Bering Treaty, something which he did very successfully, and there is a very grand portrait here showing him being presented in state to King Mongkut. What then is the aftermath of all of these events? We now have a sort of story. It's a story that's rather different from the one that we saw in Ishii and Damrong at the beginning. The laws are not burnt. There's not only one. A copy that survives. It's a bit more complicated than that. What then is the aftermath of this incident for the laws themselves and also for Nai Mot and his family? What we can see now, we have Nai Mot's volume. We can compare it. We can see that, in fact, the early work on this document, which is generally attributed to Bradley, this conversion into printed book, is actually all done by Mot. And that Bradley is actually just a copy. Now, and while it is that, we saw earlier that Prince Damrong said this whole idea of the printing was Bradley's idea, which actually, of course, it wasn't, because Bradley wasn't even in Siam at the time of the printing. He had gone away to the US for a couple of years and only came back at the point where everything was blowing up in 1850. And in fact, Bradley was getting into printing was part of something of a change in the mission. When Bradley went to the US in 1849, he swapped from one mission organization to another mission organization. And the second one did not give him so much money. So he was strapped for cash from then onwards. But because the Baptist mission had been burnt to the ground, there was an opportunity in printing. And he was able to take advantage of this opportunity to turn his printing works into a profit center for his mission. So he started printing all kinds of other things. He printed most best known is, of course, the Bangkok calendar, a yearbook, which was an ongoing publication, probably very successful. He printed a primer for teaching Thai to Siamese children. He printed Near London, the famous poem that came out this time, and he printed an edition of the Chronicles of Ayutthaya. So it becomes a profit center. And also when people came along to his printing works to buy things. He would get information from them. And he reports in 1862 that people come there and said, and asked him whether they could buy from him a copy of the laws. And obviously what had happened was that some copies of Mott's edition were floating around and other people wanted to get them. So they came and asked Bradley for them, and that showed Bradley that there was a profit opportunity. And almost immediately after that, he starts the typesetting on his edition of the laws. And we can see that what he did was to copy from Mott. We can see that because he copies everything, including the mistakes. The most flagrant of these comes here, that the scribes have been copying the laws one by one. And here they get to the end of the law on abduction, and it's got the sign-off line, and it starts off the law, the division of persons, Barmpanek, and it starts there. And it goes on for about two pages. At that point, someone perhaps tapped the scribe on the shoulder and said, "You've got it wrong. We have already copied the division of persons earlier in our copied manuscript." So the guy then stops copying Barmpanek, a division of persons, in the middle of a paragraph and starts on slaves. There are other ones like this. And what we find is that in the Bradley edition, exactly this mistake is reproduced. And this could only have happened if Bradley just simply copied Mott's edition. And there are several other lesser mistakes in this way. We also find that the copies, the manuscript copies that the scribes made for him in the scribes' hall were not destroyed. In the seizure in 1850, they were carried away to the palace, and they still survive. They are in the National Library today, and they're called the Rabat Gassab, the Gassab seizure. And you see, this is a copy of the Tamasat, and it's really very lovely scribal hand, but others of them were apparently less beautiful than this. I have not actually seen them, but Ajahn Pira has been very kindly allowed me to use some scans that he has made of these documents. And we can see from this, there is a nice irony here, that actually if these manuscripts and the books had remained at the Baptist mission, they would have been burnt in January 1851. So ironically, this seizure at least has allowed us to have access to these manuscripts from that time. What then was the aftermath for Nai Mot and his family? He, according to Clemenceau, he was not only did they seize the books in 1850, but they imprisoned him. Right? No one else mentions this, but it's quite likely to have been true. Montfort rehabilitates him, promotes him to the rank of Pra, and employs him as a government engineer. In 1860, King Mongkut wants to set up a mint because after the Bowring Treaty, there's more trade and they need more currency. And he buys the machinery from London. It's sent out accompanied by 3 engineers to set it up. And within a very short time of them arriving, all 3 of these engineers die. So the king asks the very clever Nai Mot to complete the setting up of the mint, which he does very successfully, and thereby wins great royal favour. He's then employed to set up a gasworks in the palace, to do metal casting for the navy, and to run a gold mine, which is in Bajinbury, Kabinbury. Okay. His royal patronage continues into the 5th reign. In 1868, he becomes Paya Gassab Git Goson, a title which means clever at making coins. And he becomes a councillor of state and a privy councillor. Remember, there's only a handful of people of this, so he's right at the very top of the Kunnan hierarchy. He has 3 sons, and he trains all of them to become, in his engineering and scientific skills, and they then recruited as his assistants and go on to become his successors. They accompany King Chulalongkorn when he goes to India, Java, in the title of superintendent engineer. But then, of course, things are never straightforward, are they? The first son, Sam'an, okay, he takes over the mint, the gold mining, all the major things he takes over from his father. And he gets given the title of Prapicha Golagan by King Chulalongkorn. He then gets caught up in the rivalry between the Bunag and Amatyakul families in the court of the young King Chulalongkorn. And this is a very, very bitter rivalry. Okay? In March 1879, Sam'an marries Fanny, the daughter of the British consul. 16 days later, he's accused of corruption and abuse of labor in gold mining. On 22nd of November, he's sentenced to death. He's then put in a boat and taken out to Prachinbari, and 2 days later, he's executed by beheading right beside the ordination hall in Wat Luang Prichagun, an ordination hall which he himself had built. And the site of is supposed to be down here in front of this, at the side of this hall. Again, Mot and the other two sons are stripped of their rank and of their property and thrown into jail. Okay? However, Sam'an, in a sense, does not die. He has another life of a very different kind. This is an aerial view of Prachinbari, and this Wat Luang Prichagun is in this yellow square, and the X marks the possible site of the execution. Soon after this execution, there was a shrine erected to his memory, and the shrine may have looked something like this initially, a rather rustic San Pianda type shrine. But that decayed, and when it decayed, the people of Prachinbari sponsored the creation of a much more solid shrine, which is on the main road going through the center of Prachinbari. And this is called San Jiaopo Sam'an, the shrine to Godfather Sam'an. But Godfather here doesn't mean a gangster, it means a local spirit lord, a protective deity. And this shrine is visited particularly by people, boys who are going to be ordained into the monkhood, but also for all the other reasons people visit these kinds of shrines, for the lottery and everything else. And it's always full of these offerings, which we can see. Sometime later, quite recently, a second shrine has been built to him in the back of the Wat, and that includes a statue a little bit less than life size, which apparently was presented by the Amatyakul family. And however, again, as after 1849, the family is not down and out, and in fact recovers. Okay, the influence of the Bunag wanes, the power of King Chulalongkorn increases. The other surviving sons of Nai Mot do quite well. This is a picture from Wat Benjamin Pit showing a royal Gatin ceremony in 1905, and here is the second son, Germ, in a group which includes Prince Narit and a couple of Bunag and a few other people here. So they survived into the late time. The one mystery that still remains is why the king had these books seized. There's no mention of the seizure or of this whole incident in the chronicle of the third reign by Jaupia Dibakoro. We have conducted a search in the manuscript collection of the National Library in all the likely places where you would find such an order, and we can find nothing. And we think this shows that what happened was that the king gave the order orally, but it never got committed to paper, and therefore it was always being passed on orally, which is why it wavers a little bit in the details and in the meaning. We can see this because we know that from the chronicles that the king fell sick in August. This is right the time of the Rajaput visit, and it is right the time when the panic then arrives in the missions, and Kun Wongsa goes to see the king. But from that time on, the king hardly ever turns up, rarely turns up at audience. And in the chronicle, there's only once between this period in August and his death in April of the next year, there's only one action of the king reported in the chronicles. In January, he gets worse, and eventually he dies in the 2nd of April. So he said, we think he gave the order orally, and it never got put down on paper before the king became incapacitated. Of course, someone may sometime find better evidence, but at the moment, I think that's probably the best explanation. So we still have these various explanations, interpretations of the king's action. Is there anything in these contemporary documents that helps us to go a bit further? I think there's just one thing. In the report back from Gwamlong Wongsa, after he had been to see the king, he reports to Bradley that the king was displeased with the persons who had undertaken to publish the laws of this country and sell them. Publish and sell them. I think the way to understand this is in terms of what we would today call copyright. Okay, that the king perhaps thinks that these laws are government property, and they were put together by his father. Okay, so perhaps therefore anyone who wants to print them and sell them might need to get permission, might need also to share some of the profit from the enterprise of selling. Because, of course, printing has utterly changed things. It's one of the great markers of modernity. So, whereas to send a scribe in to copy these laws by hand, one by one, is obviously very laborious and is not going to make anyone any money. But once you can print the laws in several hundred copies, there is a potential profit. So the king could, in his own way, perhaps have sensed that he could exercise copyright on these documents, whereas Mot obviously treated them as if they were in our current terminology, as if they were in the public domain. Okay, so what can we then conclude from all of this? The first is that we now know that there was not just one copy of Nai Mot. There is certainly one other, and quite likely that others will turn up. We have put some corrections in the story. We have seen that Nai Mot's role is much bigger. Bradley's role is somewhat less, that they weren't burnt and probably did all survive. But there are also many mysteries still in the story, such as the mysteries introduced by the father at the Bibliothèque mission. I hope that what this study shows is that Nai Mot is a significant figure in the history of Siam in the 19th century, and particularly of the history of modernity through its role in such things, through the contribution of such things as printing and photography, which others have seen. And I think also what this story shows is that these pioneers of the coming of modernity in Siam faced enormous risks and rewards in their career. You can see the way Nai Mot's family goes up and down, up and down, and hopefully at the end, at least more up and down. Lastly, I'd like to note that the other extraordinary thing about this story I have told there now is that this was done, this whole story, which draws on information that comes from the US, that comes from France, that comes from the UK, that comes from Siam. It was done almost without moving from this chair. that although I spent a couple of days in the Siam Society Library, mostly I was able to do it by using stuff that's online or by drawing on personal contacts to get other stuff which is online or available in other ways. So I've made enormous debts, particularly to Gregory and to Jérôme Petit, who helped to find the Mot in Paris. Very grateful to Rama Amatyakul, who gave me access. These Amatyakul family histories are very difficult to find. They weren't printed for selling; they were printed for the family. So it's very difficult to get them. And luckily, we have an old friend who is an Amatyakul. Grateful to Ajahn Pira for his help in the archives, and especially grateful to Ajahn Parkpool, who went into the archives to do the search for the king's orders. And we must also thank Donald Trump, because Ajahn Parkpool was happily working for USAID one day, and by the afternoon he was no longer working for USAID, and he was therefore available to help me in this search. So I have to thank Donald Trump. I have to thank Leah Genovese, who helped me, who knows her way around the French records, including the mission records. And I emailed her at one point saying, "Can you find Clemenceau? What do I know about Clemenceau?" and so on. She was actually sitting in the airport lounge in Doha, and half an hour later she had given me the link. Also, to get the Bradley's stuff, particularly the Bangkok calendar, there are microfilms in libraries in the US, particularly in the Michigan Library. And I remembered that over 10 years ago, we gave a presentation in the Michigan University Library, which was hosted by a very lovely lady called Lara Unger. So I Googled her and found not only is she still there, but she's in charge of the digital collections. So while I could not get access to them because you had to be a member of the library, she was able to send them to me. Simon Landy has been doing research on the Fanny affair, which I mentioned earlier. Craig Reynolds, one of the Amatyakul memoirs. The only place I could find it available is in the Australian National Library in Canberra, and Craig Reynolds helped me get that. Ed Van Roy has been doing stuff on the third reign, and we also have to thank Ajahn Kemtong and Tamara, but also the Temple Committee of Wat Lung Prichakun, because by another of those strokes of luck, when we turned up there to poke around, we got out of the car and talked to a monk about this, and he said, "Oh, you're in luck. The temple committee's monthly meeting is about to start. They're all there. Why don't you go and talk to them?" The temple committee took us round and showed us off and told us all kinds of stories about the shrines that have been built there. So that's the story of the printing in 1849-50. Thank you. And this whole thing appears in the form of an article with considerable more detail, which is coming out in the Journal of Siam Society in December 2025. Thank you very much indeed.